A year and a half ago, almost to the day, the LA Lakers were celebrating the strangest NBA title of all time, winning in the bubble in Orlando with no fans against the 5th-seeded Miami Heat, and after multiple months off due to a league suspension, going from one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league during the regular season to one of the best during the playoffs. And now, less than 18 months later, they are outside of the top 10 in the Western Conference standings, the second time in LeBron's 4 seasons in LA that they have missed the playoffs entirely. Completely dismantling a championship team in such a short period of time the way that the Lakers have isn't easy, and it's the result of some bad luck, but also a long list of roster mistakes, as the Lakers completely misjudged what made this team special. Really quickly though, I want to let you know about the sponsor of today's video, Prize Picks. Prize Picks is an awesome way to test your NBA prediction skills and win some cash while you're at it. They set the numbers. You pick between 2 and 5 players, and if you're right, you can get up to 10 times on your winnings. And to help you get started, Prize Picks is going to match up to $100 on your first deposit when you use code SPORTING. These are my picks for the evening. Feel free to use them if you'd like. And once again, thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring this video. So as we start to take a look at where things went wrong for the Lakers, we have to begin in the 2020 offseason immediately after they won the title. And honestly, I'm going to give the Lakers some credit here. This was a really solid offseason at the time. They brought back key players like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They traded for Dennis Schroeder, a move that not a lot of people expected out of them. They moved Danny Green, they moved a first-round pick, and they got back a player that the concept was kind of similar to the Russell Westbrook trade, except without him being an actual star. He was supposed to take some of the load off of LeBron and Anthony Davis during the regular season, but in the moment, the Schroeder trade was certainly defensible. Another surprise was them bringing in Montrezl Harrell on the mid-level exception, a guy that a lot of people thought was going to be worth more money than that after the success that he had with the Clippers, and then they brought in some other veterans as well. But the one big issue with this offseason was there was so much roster turnover. Typically, after you win a title, you bring back most of the guys unless they're big-time free agents that decide to leave. And that wasn't the case here with LA. They let a lot of their veterans go. A lot of the players around the edges, guys like Danny Green, they let go. And in hindsight, that was probably a poor decision. And some of the guys that they let go played real minutes for them in the 2020 playoffs. And so if there is one big flaw for this offseason, it's just not maintaining the chemistry they had from that group the year before. And then ultimately the Schroeder trade is probably a mistake given the fact that he leaves a year later. But then to start that following season, they were fantastic. They started the year 21-6. They looked like a championship contender. And then guys started to get hurt. And after the All-Star break, they were basically a 500 basketball team. Anthony Davis and LeBron combined to play a little bit over 80 games in that shortened 72-game schedule. So each of them basically played for half the season during the regular year. Then they started to turn it on as they got towards the postseason, finished the year really strongly. But as we all know, Anthony Davis gets hurt in that first round series. They lose to Phoenix after making it through the play-in game, going into a 2021 offseason with a ton of uncertainty. Really quick side note, by the way, because people love to bring this up, this Phoenix team was very good. They were probably going to beat LA in that series, even with the healthy Anthony Davis. I personally think that they would have beaten the Lakers even regardless of Anthony Davis's injury. I would have preferred to see the series play out that way rather than AD get hurt, but people love to act like this series was only a contest because AD got hurt. Now, as I said, the 2021 offseason brought a lot of uncertainty for LA. They had a couple of guys that they really needed to make some big decisions on, some players that were really critical for them over the prior couple of seasons. But still, when you looked at what the Lakers were like when they were fully healthy the season before, they still had the core of a championship group. They still could be contenders going into the 21-22 season. But the biggest surprise of all was that they felt the need to make a huge shakeup to this roster. This 2021 offseason that we're about to talk about would have made way more sense if they weren't successful when they were healthy the year before, if, like this season's team, they were bad even when they had all their core guys together, but that wasn't the case. But regardless, there were some significant roster changes, and this is really where they ruined that championship core. Now, in that 2021 offseason, there were some veterans that were likely going to leave, Marc Gasol and Montrezl Harrell, and they had some decisions to make about guys like Dennis Schroeder, Alex Caruso, and Talen Horton-Tucker. When I say they made basically every wrong decision, this might be in the argument, in the discussion, maybe this will be a video at some point, for the worst offseason in league history. First up, they prioritized Talen Horton-Tucker over Alex Caruso, giving him a deal worth over $10 million a year for 3 years. And that was a contract that even in the moment didn't make any sense, much less based off of how Horton Tucker has played this season. He was a guy that had some potential, had some exciting moments, but in terms of actual real regular season games or playoff games, the resume between him and Caruso was not even remotely close. Now, granted, maybe Caruso would have ended up being worth more money and they wanted to save some money and it made more sense to them from an efficiency standpoint to sign Talen Horton Tucker. Maybe they thought he had more potential, but in terms of a guy that you knew could contribute to a championship team, Alex Caruso was the guy to keep. And to make it even worse, he never wanted to leave. Once he was in discussions with some other teams, most notably Chicago, where he ends up going, he went back to the Lakers and he said, hey, I'd like to stay. Here's the number to keep me. Sign me to this and I'll stay. And they said no, and they lowballed him with an offer. Some other moves were made in free agency in this offseason as well. They let Dennis Schroeder go. They signed some veterans, but the big one, of course, is the Russell Westbrook trade. Immediately after this trade was made, it was a shock to me on draft night that it was even going to happen. I made a video saying that they traded for Russell Westbrook and they lost the deal. Even though I wanted to give the Lakers the benefit of the doubt in terms of the concept around the Westbrook trade, similar to what they tried to do with Schroeder the year before, it was clear that LeBron and Anthony Davis wanted someone else to take some of the offense responsibility, especially during the regular season, and Westbrook undoubtedly brought them some extra star power. And the idea was that, similar to guys like Dwight Howard in the past, once you get in the world of LeBron, you become a different player. You start to understand what it means to be a star role player, like guys like Kevin Love in the past. And the idea was maybe Westbrook could find that as well. And as we all know, it has been a massive, massive mistake and a complete disaster. And it's on multiple fronts. It's not just that he didn't fit with LeBron and AD. It's not just that he didn't play well. It's not just that his confidence was on the floor at certain points this season, but also he's one of the highest paid players in the league. He's going to opt into his player option for next season. And you still have to solve this question. Whereas with Schroeder, things went south. You couldn't figure out how to re-sign him. He ends up leaving. That's fine. But for Westbrook now, it is still so up in the air what his future is going to look like. They could decide tomorrow they want to move him, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to do so. But that isn't the only issue with the deal. They also gave up players that were a critical part of the championship core in the past. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma. These were guys that mattered. And in the moment, maybe we made fun of them, especially Kuzma and KCP, but they mattered to that championship team. They mattered in terms of depth, in terms of guys on the wing that could defend, in terms of guys that could space the floor specifically for KCP. And you moved all of that in exchange for player Russell Westbrook that has not fit. And that was the nail in the coffin of that championship group. Also, there were other options on the table, and I start to think about what this roster would have looked like had they made some other moves. For example, they could have traded for Buddy Hield. They could have traded a first in Kuzma. They could have gotten Buddy Hield, or maybe the package is slightly different. But regardless, you're keeping one of KCP or Kyle Kuzma. You're not bringing in Russ to shake things up, and you have a floor spacer in Buddy Hield. Undoubtedly, that is a better roster, and this is one of the worst trades in the history of the league in terms of a team that had an opportunity to win a title and drastically decrease those chances with one trade. Now, this is the part of the video where I acknowledge the thing that Lakers fans have probably been screaming this entire time. Oh, we weren't healthy. That's why the season didn't go well. If LeBron and AD were healthy for the entire season, they would have figured out the Russ thing. There was no chemistry. There was constant lineup changes. Here's the problem with that argument. They weren't good even when all three of the guys were healthy. And you can show numbers for that. You can watch the games when they played together for that. And maybe you can blame that on, well, they never got a chance to create any kind of continuity. There are plenty of other teams around the league that had the exact same issue, and at certain points even worse than the Lakers had it. And they still managed to figure it out to be at least a 500 team or right around there. The Lakers were a complete disaster from start to finish, and it comes down to the roster more so than it does health. Now, it's not to say that they wouldn't have been better had they been healthy. Of course, that's the case for them as well as a lot of other teams around the league. But here's the main difference between what they did in the 2021 offseason and what they did in 2020. In 2020, they saw a roster that was very good, that they needed to change things up a little bit, but they still kept the core of the group. In 2021, despite a sample size in the beginning of that season with a roster that was fully healthy, that showed that they can still be a championship contender beginning the season 21-6. Despite having that evidence, they made decisions to completely shake up and change the things that made that team initially great in 2020. That was defense, that was size, that was their ability to play in transition opportunistically. And then if they shot the basketball well, they were incredibly difficult to beat. But they took away some of the small amount of spacing they actually had. And they took away two-way players, and they took away size, and they just left LeBron and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook to say, we have stars, it's going to work. And obviously it didn't work, but I will say one thing about the Lakers over the past 2 seasons. Leading up to the 2020 season, leading up to the 2020 finals, every move they made, signing LeBron, trading all that stuff for Anthony Davis was 100% worth it. You won the title. And the last 2 seasons have not been ideal at all in terms of the kind of roster that the Lakers are, a roster that relies on an aging star in LeBron and an often injured star in Anthony Davis. These last 2 seasons being shortened, being condensed, have not been kind to them. But also, that 2020 bubble was very kind to them. They suddenly became an incredible shooting team. They had a couple of months off to play for the stretch run exclusively. And so ultimately, you can see how circumstance and how situation can really dictate how successful a team ultimately is. But you cannot deny that over the past 2 off seasons, the Lakers have actively ruined a group that won them a title just a year and a half ago.